Well, good morning, my stitchy friends. How is everybody this morning? You have reached the NeedleBugg, and my name is Karen. And today I thought we'd talk a little bit about the mysteries of parked threads. I've been reading a lot on Facebook here of late about people getting confused and not being able to wrap their head around parking threads. Plus, I've had a lot of people join my diagonal stitching group for the love of diagonal cross stitch and want to learn about diagonal stitching and parking threads. So it seemed to me to be a good time to review all of this again. I've had earlier videos on parking and diagonal stitching, but I thought, you know what? It's been a while, so it's a good time to maybe do another video and go over all of it and hopefully take the mystery out of it for a lot of you. So with that, let's get started. Today I just took a square out of a chart that I happen to have in Pattern Keeper. I did not want to show a whole pattern or what have you because I just need some type of chart in order to be able to show you how to well, I'm going to stitch it on the diagonal. We could do it in a column, but how to work with parking those threads. Now, a couple things before I start. Number one, and most important, is determine what corner of the X that you start your stitch in. I always start my X's in the bottom left corner. This is really a key thing to understanding parking and not getting confused, okay? Whatever is your starting point, so whatever corner you start your X in, that is the corner that you park your thread in. And you do not vary from that. You do that all the time. All the time. Never park it somewhere else, because what will happen is you'll get to that thread and go, yeah, right, what thread is it? I have no idea. So that's the big number one to solve the mystery. Always, always, always park in the same corner. So I park in the bottom left-hand corner. Always, always, always. If I park any place different, I get terribly confused. And believe me, people, that is a short trip. So that's the number one, the biggest number one thing to taking the mystery out of parking. The next thing that we all need to remember and to do with a great deal of consistency is always park whatever color is in your thread, in your needle, whatever color thread is in your needle. Once you've completed that X, look for the next place that color is used. So here I have the hearts highlighted. So if we stitch the top heart, the first heart in the top row, the next occurrence is directly underneath it. So I am going to park my thread in the bottom left corner of that stitch. You can keep your needle threaded or you can unthread it. That is totally up to you. And you will be able to decide better on that once you have done it a little bit more. Personally, I take my threads off just because I think they get more tangled with them. But that's me. My other suggestion is, if you are very new to parking, but maybe not new to stitching, all right, you probably have the method that you have used before ingrained, and that's probably the way you always stitch, or most of the time you stitch. And you want to start parking your threads because it does help stop that starting and stopping. You know, 2 stitches of a color and the thread, do another. No, it eliminates a lot of that. I would suggest the other thing that it helps with, and I answered this in a Facebook group just the other day. Somebody was, I believe they were stitching cross country, and they were stuck in the background. And they were getting so tired of stitching in the background. And I said to this person, if you stitch columns or diagonals, and you work down that either column or diagonal, those periods where you're stuck in the background aren't quite as bad, because you're also then going to pass through maybe a high confetti area or maybe a moderate confetti area. And then maybe you'll get to solid stitching again. But you get a variation of the type of stitching required to finish that project. So you're not stuck in the boring background. So just think about that. And is that something that maybe you want to give a try? It's not for everybody, and I don't say any of this is for everybody, but it's an option that's out there for all of you. With that, my biggest suggestion to somebody who is just starting out with parking, you know, you're an old-time stitcher. I'm an old-time stitcher. I am self-taught from the get-go. And when I first started parking, this is what I did. I didn't choose to park every color. I chose to continue the method that I was using, but I started just parking 1 or 2 colors. So I might have decided to take the 3 and the 2 out of this chart and park just those 2 colors and do the rest as I normally did. Up to you. But if you just start with a few colors, it at least gives you the opportunity to be successful, number 1. And number 2, to get some confidence. Because a lot of parking is based on one concept. Well, there's probably more concepts, but the biggest concept and the most important thing is trust. You need to trust yourself that you put that thread in the correct place, so that when you get to it, it doesn't matter what the color number is. You get to that heart, you know that that heart covers that stitch, and you know it is the correct color because you counted and placed it correctly from the last occurrence that you stitched. You counted correctly to the new occurrence, and it is placed correctly. Now, if it's not, you're going to get to that thread, and okay, you're starting out with maybe 1 or 2 colors that you're parking. You're going to get to that thread, and you're going to see on your chart, well, no, wait a minute, because you're going to mark your chart where you park things. And you're going to say, no, wait, there's nothing parked here. Why do I have this thread? Then it's time to do a little investigating. Then it's time to say, oh, okay, let's match that color with the color that should be there and see if that's it. If that's not it, then let's look at the colors that go around it, because probably what I did and what I do most frequently is I'm off by 1 stitch when I place it, either 1 row or 1 stitch within the row. You pick your mistakes up very, very quickly. So that's just some background or some suggestions on starting to park and some things you really do need to think about when you're parking your threads. When do we use parking? A lot of people use it a lot. But cross-country stitchers can use it. Some cross-country stitchers will stitch the color and then they'll get to where there's a long jump. So they may, and I have done this, I may park it in the next occurrence that's maybe 10, 15 stitches away, but it won't stitch anything yet. But I'll cover it up with the things that need to be stitched between here and here. Okay. If it's too long a jump, you end it off and start it again when you need it. For cross-country stitchers. People that stitch in columns, well, you go straight down the column, use parking. I would suggest if you stitch in columns that you randomly feather the edges. Don't make a straight line. Don't make a sawtooth. Both of those are going to give you lines. What I recommend that you do is randomly flow into the other column. So if you're stitching, I don't know, whatever color, and there's 3 stitches over here, stitch those and then go back into your column. Okay, but do it randomly. Don't have any kind of pattern to it. It's those patterns that cause the lines. The lines are caused mainly by tension. So if you are randomly doing it, you're spreading out so that you don't have always the same spot that is getting the tension. Okay, so do it randomly. You can stitch on the diagonal. And again, if you're stitching in diagonal, try and vary from that diagonal on occasion for the same reason. Because even though the philosophy behind diagonal stitching is not to get lines, I'm going to sit here and tell you that you can get lines. Happened to me. You know, your tension varies from day to day. One day you're stitching away and you're nice and relaxed. And stitching is just flowing. And it's a wonderful day. Some days you're really stressed. And you pick up your stitching to help relieve that stress. But what you are unconsciously doing is pulling that thread just a little bit harder because you're really, really stressed and you're really, really upset about something or whatever. But your tension will vary according to your mood. That's when you get the lines. So if you stagger and don't always go in a definite straight line or a definite pattern like the sawtooth, you're one more thing to help avoid the lines. Some people go in 10 by 10 blocks. 10 by 10 blocks on the diagonal is a popular thing right now. Royal Rose is another popular way right now. All of them use parking. So now that we talked about all of that stuff, I bet you're ready to see just how do we park. Let's look at that. Okay, so I am going to stitch off of the graph that you see here. I have it in Pattern Keeper. Okay, so on Pattern Keeper, I'm going to hit the search button at the top, and I'm going to highlight the first symbol on the first row. Okay, which happens to be color 161. I have all my threads kind of pulled here because I do want to show you also how I start threads. And some of my threads I have to start a little, not with a loop start, because I cut my floss to stitch with just one strand, and I don't necessarily, and this is 14 count, so I don't necessarily cut thread long enough to stitch with a loop start. So what I do then is, and I'm going to start in this square here. This is not a project I'm going to stitch. This is just for me to stitch a sample for all of you to get an idea of. My light needs to be a bit brighter here. Let me see if I can move it in a little bit closer. Okay, I just messed with the... Okay, it'll come back. Focus. Come on. Let's see. There we go. It's the autofocus is a little bit slow sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to start here in this block. What I do if I am not going to do a loop start, okay, is I go down. Oh, and this Ada cloth is so stiff. It was a real stinker to get in the hoop. Okay, I go down in the top corner, top right corner. I'm going to pierce, if I can pierce this, the block as close to the middle as I can finagle my needle through. There we go. Okay. And I'm going to pull that thread through until I have just a tiny little end. And then I'm going to go back down in that same hole. And then I'm going to come up in my starting position, which is the bottom. Well, when Karen can find the hole, it'll be a good day. This fabric is so stiff. But I wanted you to be able to see. So I come up in the bottom. Now, there's some fuzzy there, but that's going to go away when I go the first leg of my X and complete it. And people go, oh, does that hold? Yes. You only really need to catch that end one time for it to hold. So it will hold. Okay. Now, let's look at our chart. I'm going to finish this X. Okay. I'm going to complete it by going down in the top right. And I'm going to now mark my chart that I have done that X. And I'm going to look, where do I need this next? Well, I need it next right underneath. So I am going to mark this as parked by putting, I have it set up that I have the shortcuts on Pattern Keeper, so I just have to double tap it very quickly, and that will put the triangle in the bottom left corner. And then that is where I'm going to pull my thread up, and I'm going to just let it there. Okay. Just let it there. You can take your needle off or you can let your needle on. That's up to you. All right. Next is the threes. Okay. 3746. And that one, oh, I had a long enough piece that I can do a loop start. And for those of you that don't know how to do a loop start from the front, we'll do it this way. So since my first leg goes bottom left to upper right, my needle with the loop on it is going to go down in the top right. This is to start from the top with a loop. I'm not going to pull that loop through. I'm going to come up in the bottom left. Okay. And now I'm going to put my needle through the loop. Okay. I'm going to pull it tight. Okay. But now I'm going to go back down in that top right hole and pull it through. And now my 2 threads are there. I'm going to complete my X. And then I'm going to go to Pattern Keeper. I'm going to mark that I stitched that. And I'm going to look, where is the next occurrence? Well, there's no more in row 1. There's another one in row 2, just underneath the one I stitched. So what am I going to do? I'm going to pull my thread up in the bottom left corner. I'm going to let it there. Parking it. Okay. Next, I'm going to mark it as parked. Okay. Now, when I go to the next color, you can see the little triangles that are there. That means there's threads in the lower left corners. Okay. Now, we're going to do the 2s. Ooh, we get to do quite a few of those. Okay. Now, oh, this is a short thread, but I do have a loop. So let's see what we can get out of this. We're going to start the same way. We're going to go down in the upper right. We have the loop. We're going to come up in the bottom left, go through the loop, go back down in the top right. Okay. Now, you have a choice here. If you notice, there's 3 stitches of the same color. And then it skips one and has another stitch of the same color. If you so choose, you can, and that's what I'm going to do because there are people that do this, you can do the first half of those 3 stitches, 2, 3, I'm not a stiff fabric stitcher. Skip one and do the next stitch. Okay, and then come back and cross them. Or you could do them one at a time. That is totally up to you, and however you prefer to stitch. I just suggest this way as an option. Okay. So now we're going to look. We did these 3 or 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the next row we have 2 occurrences. So you could go to either one. My choice would be to go to the one directly underneath the 3, because I think that will use less thread. If I go to the one underneath, if I go to the farthest one next to the diagonal line, I'm having a long carry to that one. I'll do that X, then I have another long carry back to the one where I'm going to park now. By parking it here, I have a short carry. Yes, I have to go over to that 2 and come back, but I think that's going to use a little bit less thread. So we're going to park it here. and we're going to mark it as parked. Next, we're going to go to the hearts. 4. Fortunately, I got all my colored threads ready beforehand. And this one I do not have a loop start on. So this one I'm going to do that other way again. Just in case you missed that, I'm going to go down in the top right. I'm going to pierce as close to the center of the block as I can. And sometimes when you have stiff fabric, that's a little tough. Okay. I'm going to leave a smidge of a tail, go back down in the top right, come up in the bottom left, which is my normal start, and then back down in the top right, and complete my X, and look for the next occurrence, because I only have that one stitch. Okay. All right. Next occurrence is directly underneath. So I am going to park my thread there. And almost dropped my needle. Okay. So, whoops. We're going to mark that as stitched. We're going to park it underneath. Next color is the triangle. And that is number 160. We could do a loop on this one. So I hope you're getting the gist of this. Now, I work line by line. And that's what I'm showing you, is line by line. So we're going to start this with the loop start. Okay. Go down. First leg completed. Come up and go. Okay. So the next occurrence is twice in the second row. You can pick either one of those. It does not matter. So I kind of like to zigzag. So if I go this way on this row, the next row I go this way. So I like to go to the closest one. So I am going to park it here. Now, when your first couple rows, this isn't as, it's important, but it's more important once you're down a column or down a diagonal or whatever, and you have maybe more threads going. In addition to saying, okay, I just did this stitch, I'm going to go down one and over one to the next stitch. It's advantageous and very helpful if you have gridded fabric, because then you can also double check your placement by looking at your grid line and saying, okay, this stitch is the 4th stitch to the left of the grid line. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that matches up with your chart. So you want to use every available point of reference to double check your parking and say, am I in the right spot? So I'm going to mark that one as stitched, park it there, and move to the next. And that is 501. And 501, I have to start the, well, I'm just going to leave it. Since this is just demonstration purposes and not going to be used for anything, I'm really just going to let a hangy tail on the back. Okay. Well, it helps when you have your threads a bit more even. Okay. Okay, so 501. Now I am going to do a little bit of a cheat here because I do not have the next color. I'm out of it. So since it's just a sample, I'm cheating and I'm going to stitch the next stitch with 501. Okay. Okay. Just so that I don't have any holes. And you can experience what it's like. Okay. Now, in this diagonal, if we're going to stitch on the diagonal, you can see that I stitched this one, but there is no more occurrences of this color in this diagonal. So now you have two choices. You can either end this thread, or because that next occurrence is in the very next diagonal, I'm just going to move this over so you can see. Dun, 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 dun. There it is. It's in the top row. It's also in this second row. What I'm going to do, and this is always an option, when parking, if it does not occur in the section that you are working, in the diagonal that you are working, you do have the option to park it in the next diagonal. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we want to go over 5 from the grid line. 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is the 5th stitch, so I'm going to park it in the bottom left corner. Now, again, it's preference. Here in the beginning, I will do that. However, once I get further down the chart and I'm at the halfway point, I don't always park into the next diagonal because I don't like all those extra threads hanging. Again, it's preference. You will be able to tell what you would rather do. So with that, I'm going to park over here. Oops. Okay. Now, I stitched this little diamond thingy with the color that I had because I don't have that color. I'm out of it, so I couldn't put it in there. Okay, so now I'm going to jump. You can do one of two things. You can start back at the beginning again and work your way over. You can zigzag down, however you like. Since my thread is parked, this symbol is the same as the symbol that's the first one in the row. I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to now stitch the stitch, and I know this is the right color because it was the color directly above and I parked it directly underneath. So this is where the trust comes in. You need to trust that you've parked correctly. That's the biggest factor. That's the hardest part to get over when learning how to park. Most people are going, how do I know? How do I know? How do I know that's the right color? It's not marked anyway. How do I know? You need to trust in your ability to count and your ability to place things in the correct place. So I know this is correct. because I have it marked number 1 on my chart. It's marked as there's a thread there. If I was really in doubt, I know that the stitch above it was the same color. Okay, they match. It's the same color. So we're good. We're going to just go ahead and stitch that. Okay, well, actually, we're going to highlight them so that we know where the next one is. Okay, so because I like to work in rows, I am going to look at this same row and realize, oh, this color's over here, the second one from the grid line, and I'm going to stitch that. Now, let me just talk about something else. Not everyone likes to stitch row by row. Some people like to do cross country within the diagonal. So I'm going to mark these 2 as stitched. What you could do is move these up out of the way, out of your way, and you could stitch the rest of this symbol within the diagonal. Or you could stitch the rest of this symbol within the square and then park in your next diagonal or your next square. Okay, now since this is such a short diagonal that I'm working on, if I were to stitch all of that symbol, first of all, I'd include the 3 stitches on the 3rd row that meld into the next diagonal. Okay. I would then probably end my thread and restart the thread, because in the next diagonal, that stitch is way up here at the top. So to run a thread from, I can't have you, here we go. And I just picked a square on this chart. I did it randomly. So to run a thread from down here in the bottom left corner all the way up to the top right corner is a really long travel. And I don't know that you want to do that. So I would probably end the thread before I would travel that far. I try to keep my traveling down to 10 stitches or less, just because that helps to keep your back a little bit neater. Okay, so if I want to stitch line by line, I'm going to park 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th one from the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th one yeah, 5th one from the edge. Okay, then I will move. If I'm going to stitch the rest of them in the diagonal, I would just continue stitching that color, end it off, and then I would restart it when I get up here. Okay, so I'm going to mark this as part, oops, I always hit the wrong buttons. There we go. So then my next one is the 3s. And I only have 1 in this row. Now, for some people swear that parking is faster. And in all honesty, I think that depends on which style, for lack of a better way to put it, which style of stitching that you're using with your parking. Okay, if you're going row by row like this, it's slower. Okay, if you're doing cross country within the diagonal, it's probably a little faster because you're not changing colors as often. Okay, so let's, with this color, just show you a little bit about how we would do the completing the color in this diagonal. Okay, so I stitched this one, so I'm going to mark that as stitched. The next one is the next row, the 5th stitch in. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it would be right here next to the one that I have parked, and that is correct because there is a thread parked next to it. Okay, let's move that out of the way. See, there's a thread parked next to it. Okay. So we would stitch that. Now, there's one directly underneath. So we would stitch that. It's up to you which way you choose to do this. One, then we skip one, and there's one. And we skip another one, and there's one. When you can get through this stiff fabric. Stiffness, stiffness, stiffness. Okay, now there's one directly below here. And actually this will make a line of 4, so we'll stitch 4. See how much faster this is going by doing it this way? And again, like I said, it is preference, whichever you prefer. Personally, for myself, and again, I don't say this is right or wrong. I'm just saying what I prefer is to go line by line because I think my stitches look neater and they lay nicer. But again, it's whichever you prefer. Okay, I just like to show what the options are. Okay, so this will complete all the 3s in that diagonal. Okay, so now, like I said, I have the choice to end my thread because, as you see, there's nothing really close. I have the choice to end my thread and start a new thread, whoops, way up here. Okay, up there. That's what I would opt to do. Okay, so we are going to call this thread, and I'm just going to stick it over here, ended. All right. Then we would move along to the next color, and there's only one stitch of that. And then there's nothing else even close by. it always baffles me why. Other than it's some kind of an accent or to make something stand out more, or I have no idea why. But it's there, so we'll stitch it. And with that, we'll start with a loop because we can. I guess it helps if you put your loop at the correct end of your thread, doesn't it? Makes a difference. Okay, start with a loop. I'm not a big want to stitch with 2 strands of floss person, but loop starts are nice. Okay. And we're going to stitch that stitch, and we see that there's nothing else close. So what you would do is you would end it off right away. And I'm just, like I said, just going to stick it over here to the side out of the way and mark it as stitched. Here's the other thing, and I'm very bad at this, and people that watch my videos will tell you, I forget to mark things off. For one reason or another, I forget. Or I get carried away with stitching and then I just move on to the next color, and or you get called away and you're in the middle of stitching something and okay, I'll mark that when I get back, and then you don't. Okay, so here we have the 2s, and we're gonna, again, you can do this either way. You can go line by line. There's one over here. People are probably saying, which method uses less thread? And I honestly don't know the answer to that. I honestly can't tell you. I just, yeah, not sure. So then if you're going to stitch the whole color, you would come down here. And if you're going line by line, you would stop here and park here. If you're going to stitch the whole color, you would just continue stitching this one. See, and this is right here why I prefer line by line, because now I have to come up in the holes where there's already threads. This one, there's already 2 threads in there, and you run the risk. Let me get you in just a little closer. You run the risk of pulling up these other threads and making them loose. Not saying that it always happens. I'm just saying that there is the possibility and the tendency that that could happen. Whereas if you're stitching line by line, you are always coming up in an empty hole or a hole with only 1 thread. But see there, here I've been coming up with in holes that are already what I call dirty holes. Okay, now here there's nothing else in this diagonal, so I could carry my thread to the next diagonal or end it off and start at the top of the next diagonal with a new thread. Again, the choice is up to you. So since we're running on almost an hour, I hope you now have a better idea and able to wrap your head around parking a little bit better, and that it makes a little bit more sense. Some of it is up to you as an individual, how you do or do not want to park. Some of it is you need to follow. I always say there are no rules in cross stitch. Well, there are no rules in cross stitch. However, when you're parking, I keep getting my hair in that top camera. When you're parking, there are certain guides. We won't call them rules because there's no rules, but there are certain guidelines that you do need to follow. And those are, I will go over them again. We said them in the beginning, but they are always, always, always park in the same corner, because you are going to get confused if you don't. One thing I forgot to mention, if you are using pre-gridded fabric. Now, this sample, I just used a friction pen and drew on a grid. If you are using pre-gridded fabric, in some counts, that gray line is between the stitches. In most counts, that gray line is on a stitch. You need to make a decision. Is that gray line going to be stitch number 1 or stitch number 10? Doesn't matter. You can have it as either. Are you always going to start your block on the gray line and end on the white line above that gray line so that it's stitch number 1? Or are you going to start right underneath that gray line and end, have stitch number 10 on the gray line? And that goes for both directions, horizontally and vertically. It is up to you how you do it. There is no right or wrong. Either way is correct. What I caution you on is whichever way you choose, always, always, always do it the same way. Not only within your piece, because if you change it halfway through the piece you're stitching, it's going to be messed up. Don't start project A with the gray line as stitch number 1 and project B as the gray line as stitch number 10. Don't do that. Ask me how I know. Because you think parking messes with your head? You try working on a project where the gray line is number 1 and then switching and working on a project where the gray line is number 10 and then go back to this project where the gray line is number 1. You talk about messing with your head. That will do it every time. You will not know or remember which you are working on. So my suggestion is don't do that. Whatever you decide, gray line, 1 or 10, always, always do that on every piece you stitch on gridded fabric. Do not vary from that. That's gospel. I've been there, done that, and believe me, I ended up restarting the one because you can't, no, it just messes with you too much. So, as long as you keep that in mind, always park in the same corner, Look for the next occurrence of that color, and that's where you park your thread. And the biggest thing of all is trust yourself. Trust in your ability to count correctly and place that thread exactly where it needs to be. And if it's not, and you make a mistake, which we all do, check that thread against your stock or your supply that you're stitching from. If it doesn't match the color that it's supposed to be, because Pattern Keeper tells you the symbol and the color. If it doesn't match, look at the stitches around it. Did you miscount by one stitch in any direction? And believe me, I do that. So I just pull out my colors, look at the stitches, and go, oh yeah, this should have been down one row, or this should have been to the left one row. It is not that hard to fix. It is very, very easy. So, my friends, I hope this has taken some of the mystery out of parking for you, and you are able to start using the parking method, if you so desire, in whatever manner you desire. Whether it's diagonal, whether it's columns, whether it's using cross-country, whether it's however you want to do it. I hope you can wrap your head around it. I hope you can enjoy it. And I hope you can have some joy in what you're stitching, because that's what it's all about. So with that, my friends, we're going to call this one a wrap. And I will bid you farewell. Thank you so, so much for joining me. If you have questions, please leave me a comment. If you like this video, hit the like button. I would really appreciate that. So until next time, my friends, remember, there are no rules in cross stitch except for when you park. So have a great day. We're coming up on a weekend. Have a great weekend, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.